Guild Wars 2 is an online role-playing game with fast-paced action combat, a rich and detailed universe of stories, awe-inspiring landscapes to explore, 2 challenging player versus player modes, and no subscription fees. And Lord of the Rings Online is a tab target combat system MMORPG based in the beloved world of Middle-earth, where you can level your character all the way from the Shire to Mordor and beyond. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the brand new series MMO Fight Club. I am your fight master, fight lord, fight liege. I don't know, it's a brand new series. Let me know what I should call myself in the comments below. But in this series, we are going to be pitting 2 incredible MMORPGs against one another in 7 distinct categories. We'll put them up against one another in these categories and then we'll determine the winner. Tonight, entering into the octagon are 2 incredible MMOs in their own right. Lord of the Rings Online on one side versus Guild Wars 2 in the other. Both of these games are honestly phenomenal, and they're 2 of my favorite MMORPGs of all time. Some other future episodes might ask the question, what is the winning MMO and what is the losing MMO? But this one really is a story of 2 winners. Both of these are incredible. If you have played one and not the other, I think you're really missing out. So today, I'm excited to really parse and find the nuance between these 2 incredible games. Now, of course, before we get started, please do hit that like button and let's me be seen by other MMO lovers out there. If you love this kind of content, let me know in the comments below and then hit that subscribe button for me. But of course, this is my opinion. I'd really like to hear yours in the comments below, especially if I say something that maybe you disagree with or you would choose another category differently. Let me know, of course, in the comments down below. But hey, tonight's all for fun, so let's jump into our very first episode of MMO Fight Club. Now tonight, for these 2 incredible MMOs, we will be facing these 2 incredible games up against one another in 7 distinct categories. The first category is combat, the second is leveling and world building, the third is character immersion, the fourth is PvP systems, the fifth is PvE systems, then comes endgame grind, and then of course, last but not least, the monetization systems of this game. If a game wins a category, they get a point, there are no ties, and then of course at the end, since we have 7, whichever one has more points will win the game. Let's jump into it. All right, now first of all, let's start with talking about combat. Now Guild Wars 2 employs a hybrid tab target and action combat system. You use the tab button or the mouse to click on a target and then attack that target like a tab targeting system, but the most skilled players will need to utilize dodge rolling while rotating through skills to achieve success. Positionality and the enemy's position is key in this game. In Guild Wars 2, I would say that attacks feel weighty and significant, with big and bold numbers engaging all those dopamine receptors that we have. Group and boss encounters are also really fun, requiring you to pay deep attention to red circles, dodge roll areas, and telegraphed attacks to succeed. Now, each class does have a unique gimmick, I would call them, that builds their own unique role in the combat setting, and elite specializations make the end game very customizable. For those that don't play Guild Wars 2, elite specializations exist within each class. So the Guardian is a unique class, the Warrior is a unique class, and so on. And then each of these unique classes gets elite specializations at max level. And typically each class gets 3. For instance, for the Guardian, you have the elite specializations of Dragon Hunter, Firebrand, and Willbender, with each of these classes playing a unique role within the game. And of course, this adds to the customizability of the combat system, because within each class that you choose, each one has its unique combat style, but typically each class does fall within the up close DPS and far away DPS, and then maybe some support, maybe some tanking roles, but pretty much DPS is involved in every single class. But this allows the end game to be very customizable. I think the combat system itself in Guild Wars 2 is very engaging as well, with really having to worry about where your player is positioned. It has a very strong combat system. For our other game, Lord of the Rings Online, it employs a very traditional tab targeting combat system, a lot like World of Warcraft. There aren't any dodge roll mechanics or anything like that, but the combat does feel significant and customizable based on class preference. The combat feels weighty and fun to do, and for me, Lord of the Rings Online's combat comes alive most in the uniqueness of its classes. Each class, even if it plays a specific Holy Trinity role, tends to do so in different different ways. Let's take range DPS for example. There are multiple range DPS classes in that you stand far away and pew pew the enemy down until they're dead, but all of the ranged classes do it a bit differently and each one has their own flavor. Runekeepers rely upon the attunement system, while hunters rely upon focus points, and lore masters on pure damage and pet damage as well. Each of these does have a range DPS element, but the combat is very varied based on the class itself. I would also say, as a positive for Lord of the Rings Online, that the class combat creativity is very, very high with LOTRO, like the Warden with the Gambit system. Now, on the negative side of Guild Wars 2's combat, most boss battles and large encounters tend to have the same type of mechanics to make the game more accessible to open world group combat, which of course is a good thing. We love good accessibility, but the more unique encounters require a good understanding of raids and the ability to make some friends to actually get into these higher level mechanics, as we'll talk about in some group PvE systems a little bit later on. However, the downside to LOTRO's combat is the lag that exists in the game. The servers in Lord of the Rings Online are not necessarily the best, especially if you're playing in the EU, in Australia, or in Asia. It's going to be a hard time for you. Some classes are even kind of fully locked out for those players. The caster class of the lore master, the warden with their reliance upon quick gambit building and then execution. Because of the lag that does exist in this game, sometimes those can be inaccessible, which will make the combat for those people feel really frustrating. To me, I haven't really had this issue because I live on the west coast of the United States, but for those people, that is a negative of LOTRO in general, but definitely in the combat area. In comparing these two, they both have really respectable and fun combat systems. LOTRO emphasizes the uniqueness of its classes, but the variety of combat styles with elite specializations is where Guild Wars 2 really shines. And like I said, this is really a contest between two great games, and I really love both of these systems for their own reason. However, back to the wall, if I had to choose one that made me feel the most excited and engaged throughout the encounters that I have in combat, I'd have to go with Guild Wars 2 winning this point by a hair, but not by much. Point 1 for combat goes to Guild Wars 2. All right, now our second category that we're going to be talking about is the leveling experience in world building, which is how fun is leveling and how good is the world that you get to travel through, and this does include the story. Let's start here with Lord of the Rings Online. Now, this is a long leveling system. This is something that I emphasize to new players all the time. This is very much like a Lord of the Rings walking adventure with months to Endgame if you really take the time to read the story and enjoy the world. The way the LOTRO developers have created this game has been to allow you to walk through Middle Earth and just experience every little bit of it in painstaking detail. The quests in this game are incredible, with some of the best storytelling and some of the best quest writing genuinely in the business. However, like I said, and this is a positive or a negative depending on where you come from, this is a long leveling experience. They want you to experience the fullness of Middle Earth. And really, it's one of the best compliments that I can give to Lord of the Rings Online. It's the best version of Middle Earth out right now that you can genuinely explore. If you watch a content creator go into Lord of the Rings Online, you'll notice that very often they get blown away by just how large and vast the world is, with some of them saying, hey, let's walk from the Shire to Mordor, only to realize that if you were to truly walk from one end to one end, it would take something like 2 days. It's crazy. On the world building side, the vistas in this game are genuinely gorgeous, even though it is an older game with an older graphics engine. I find myself very often just sitting and listening to the music while I overlook one of the vistas in this game, and it's just genuinely incredible. The immersion of the world in LOTRO cannot be understated. However, I do have to continue to come back to lag in this game, especially for the EU player. The lag can take away from the immersion of the world building. Now, as far as Guild Wars 2 goes, the biggest strength of the leveling and world building experience is the visual fidelity of this game. It is immensely beautiful. Now, the way that you typically level through this game is one, through the main story, and then there are other activities like world versus world, PvP, things like that that you can level up through. And then the last one is something called map completion. Now, every map in Guild Wars 2 has multiple objectives to walk through. These objectives include quests, points of interest, vistas, mastery points, and more. And every time you complete a map, you get a large sum of rewards, and every time you complete portions of the map, you again get experience. The goal of Guild Wars 2 really is to level you very fast, because a lot of the best stuff is at endgame in this game. Now, as far as the storytelling, the story is okay. Characters are quirky and fun, but the cutscenes are not the best. They're just kind of routine for the most part, especially through the base game. Now, yes, it does have cutscenes and voice acting, which is more than Lord of the Rings Online has, but we have to judge what we have. And if I had to choose between reading the quest text in Lord of the Rings Online and the cutscenes of Guild Wars 2, I'd go with the quest telling of LOTRO every time. Leveling, of course, in this game can get a little bit repetitive, but that's where ArenaNet has come through and really added speed to the end game and a lot of level skipping mechanics that you get from simple things like playing the world versus world experience. For instance, whenever I go into world versus world on one of my higher level characters, typically once a day I will earn a Tome of Knowledge that can instantly boost an alternate character to level 80, which is the max level, and then you can start working on the end game from there. As for the verdict in this category, Guild Wars 2 has done an immense job of putting together a beautiful world from scratch, meaning that it doesn't have an IP to lean upon. The world feels lived in, with pathing NPCs and different cultures interacting, and lots to do with exploration. However, LOTRO has the definitive trump card. It's the journey and world of Middle Earth. For me, it's hard for really any game to compete with LOTRO in this category. Although it isn't perfect, it's the best version of Middle Earth that we have, and Middle Earth is honestly the greatest fantasy setting ever to be created in existence. The leveling and world building point goes to Lord of the Rings Online. Now the next one is character immersion, and I like to call this the RPG ability of your player. Not necessarily role-playing, but the ability for you to immerse yourself within the progression of your character through character creation screens, customization, gearing, meaningful progression systems, and more. Let's talk about LOTRO. Now, as far as character creation goes, I would call this really good. I'd give this a solid 8 out of 10 for character creation. There are lots of ways to customize your character and to choose what they look like and how they work, but there has been some debate recently on whether or not this really lives up to modern standard. I personally give this category an 8 out of 10, but for a lot of people, it's not quite there for them. Now, as far as progression systems, there is a traditional 3-tier progression tree system where, a lot like classic World of Warcraft, you have 3 trait trees to choose from, and that will really shape the foundational elements of your class. There's also a race trait system where if you're a hobbit, you get certain traits, and if you're a man, you get certain traits. And then there's a very traditional gearing grind where as you level up, you want to get better gear, and as you get to max level, the real end game is to get better gear so that you can do better stuff. Now, I think it's important to point out here that for the Lord of the Rings nerd, there is a lot to RPG here. It's the best really way, in my opinion, to live out your Middle-earth fantasy. If you've always dreamed of being a hardworking dwarf that was badass in battle, that's what you can be. If you wanted to be like Legolas and be an elf hunter, that's what you can be, and it plays that really well. Now, as far as customizability of your character, the outfit system that exists in Lord of the Rings Online is a little bit limiting. You do have to buy additional slots typically to really take advantage of the outfit system. However, you do get 2 free outfit slots, and these are very easy to switch between. Simply put stuff into your outfit slots and then switch between them on a whim. No need to go anywhere, no need to pay any currency. That's awesome. As for Guild Wars 2, the character customization at the beginning is what I would call a 9 out of 10. It is very, very good. There is a rich character creation screen. You can basically create anything you want in any way possible. Another great thing about the character immersion in this game is the mastery point system. The mastery point system in Guild Wars 2 works a lot like the champion point system for Elder Scrolls Online, in that once you hit max level, you begin to really delve into your character's mastery systems through mastery points, through training, and these things help your character through little passive bonuses to mount speed and ways to interact with the map. It's a really cool system that has hours and hours of content and gameplay, but if you're not quite max level in the mastery system, you don't necessarily feel like you're missing out on too much. There's a lot of incentive to do it, but it's pretty easy to level in the background while you play. In this game, also, the mount system is great. The mount system is really world-class in Guild Wars 2 with tons of different mounts that all do different things to help you traverse the maps better. The Springer can jump high, the Raptor can jump far. It's really, really awesome. Transmog in this game, of course, is the end game. It's very top-notch. The die system in this game is awesome, very easy to use. I will say that the transmog system does cost an in-game currency, but not too big of a deal because you get these pretty often. And again, each class has 3 different elite masteries that totally change the flavor of the class, meaning that you can really get even more immersed into your character. The build craft in Guild Wars 2 through talent trees is very good, very customizable. However, I would say that gearing is horizontal at end game. Basically, once you hit end game, you can go a little bit higher with gear score, but for the most part, you're going to be pretty maxed out pretty quickly, which is a turnoff to some people when it comes to the RPG ability of the game. A lot of people just want that endless grind. I'm not one of those, but if you are, that is what it is. Now, for this category's verdict, I think that this is the closest category for me between the two. Both games offer incredible character immersion and buildcraft. They offer great outfit systems, gear systems that fit different people, and more. This category really depends on what you connect with best. If you're a Lord of the Rings nerd, it's probably going to be much easier to see yourself in the character, but if you are a big transmog outfit person, a big buildcraft person, I think that Guild Wars 2 just on a non-nerd level slightly edges out Lord of the Rings, so in my opinion, this one has to go to Guild Wars 2, but it goes painfully and with lots of regret, and I'm probably going to change my mind as soon as I hit the end recording button, to be honest with you. All right, now let's move on to the PvP systems of this game. Now, Guild Wars 2 has a world-class PvP system, in my opinion. The world versus world system is absolutely second to none, with 3 massive teams fighting for keeps, castles, supply camps, and more. Massive Zerg-like battles, but really accessible and easy for the player to get into. There's also arena PvP, where you can go and have fun 5 versus 5. There's rated and ranked PvP for the hardcore PvPer. It's just there, and it's there in spades, and in my opinion, they do it almost better than any other MMO. Now, for Lord of the Rings Online, it's a story of the opposite. Really, PvP is not the story of LOTRO. There is PvP in the form of player versus monster player, where you can roll as either a free player, the elves, men, dwarves, hobbits, or you can roll as one of the monster players, which would be the orcs, the wargs, the spiders, the things like that, and you play on an open world map. However, this system in comparison is really like a less good world versus world in almost every way. It's a very unbalanced system. I have full videos on the unbalance of this system, so you can go watch those, but it's unbalanced in a really strange way, and it just doesn't really work. The keeps that you flip on this map, there are only 5 or 6 of them to my knowledge, and you don't really siege down the castle. You just walk in, kill a keep lord, and then that keep is yours. It's a little bit lackluster, especially by modern standards. There is no rated or unrated PvP system either. So I think this is a pretty easy category to hand the win to. This one goes very handily to Guild Wars 2. All right, now let's move on to group PvE systems, where again, the category is much closer. Now, in group PvE, LOTRO's biggest strength in this is its design for its encounters. The designs for encounters in this game are great. From duo player content all the way up to full-sized raids, I've found that the bosses in this game are very, very difficult, they're very intricate, and it's really fun to try to coordinate with your team to try to take down these hard bosses. I would personally give a special shout out to the Rift of Ner'zghazu being one of the original base game raids that to me is still one of the greatest pieces of instanced group content of all time, with the Balrog at the end being genuinely one of the best boss encounters ever in my opinion. And they have this all the way from raids down to duo content where the bosses are fun and engaging, yet they're still really accessible, and I think LOTRO walks that line very, very well. LOTRO also has a large variety of content for smaller groups, the duos and trios that I talked about, and I think this is really great for those people that come in with 1 friend or 2 friends trying to try out Middle-earth for the first time. You're not necessarily going to need to break into a raiding kinship. You're going to be able to experience a lot of great group content as just 2 or 3 of you. However, I would say that Lord of the Rings Online's biggest weakness in this area is player population. Now, this game is quite a populated game in my opinion. There's more than enough players to do most content. However, in the mid-game, you'll notice that since the game is so long, some of the content is more or less dead. There's not as many players doing it unless they're doing it for nostalgia reasons, and so that's kind of a bummer for sure. However, I have noticed that the community really makes up for this in that if you want to do a nostalgic raid for fun, a lot of higher end level players will come play with you just to experience it with you. Now, Guild Wars 2's biggest strength in the group PvE area is player population. It's a massive game, and its open world meta events, which are very, very fun. These open world meta events are awesome. They're an accessible way to do massive, big group content together, and they really have that feeling of completing a raid together. However, its biggest weakness is that it still hasn't quite figured out what it wants to be when it comes to really high-end group instanced content like raids, dungeons, and fractals. Although all of those things exist, they exist kind of in a strange space where they don't necessarily all fit together and all work. The raiding scene, if you love it, is pretty decent, but I would say it's not quite as good as LOTRO's. The dungeon scene is okay, but again, not quite as good as LOTRO's. And again, this is just really in my opinion. Now, one place that I think that their instance content does stand out is in the fractal system, which is a lot like the Mythic Plus system in World of Warcraft, where you increase the difficulty of these dungeons. However, I personally have not really connected to these in a way that's really meaningful. I've tried them, they just don't really tickle my fancy too much. And so for me in group PvE, I think this one handily goes to Lord of the Rings Online just in how they handle their content. All right, now next, let's talk about the end game grind in these games. And really the question that we're trying to ask is, does it respect your time and does it reward you well? Because we want our time to be respected and then we want those rewards to be really awesome. Now, Lord of the Rings Online has a pretty typical end game grind, which is basically you running content to get better gear for your player so that you can run better content to get better gear for your player. It's a very traditional grind, and this is not a bad thing. This is how World of Warcraft works. This is how Final Fantasy XIV works. Does it respect your time? Absolutely. It's a very well done system in my opinion, with different raids actually tiering up as you go through them. The raids, again, very engaging, very fun. There's also player housing at endgame. A lot of people do like to role play instruments at endgame, and the endgame is really fun. However, the question of is the endgame grind really rewarding? For me, that's kind of a debatable topic. And the reason is because a large part of your endgame grind is going to be about traceries in your legendary items. Now, without getting too in depth with this, essentially you get a legendary item at around level 50, level 55, and then you level that item up with you throughout the game. Now, initially to me, that actually sounds like a really cool idea, especially in the world of Lord of the Rings with Anduril and Sting and Glamdring, these massively legendary weapons. You really getting to have one of these is kind of a cool thing. However, what I've found personally as the unintended consequence is, as you go through these end game raids, you're typically trying to just grind out a minute amount of more power for the same weapon that you had at level 55. There's not really a big change in this, and because of that, the reward isn't necessarily very exciting to me. If you put two level 140 players, which is the max level in Lord of the Rings Online, together in the town square, there's typically not going to be too much of a difference between those to the naked eye, which I think for me is a little bit frustrating and a little bit hard. You really want your player to stand out if you've spent dozens of hours grinding out the next piece of power in your game, especially if you're going to be living in this system. Now, for Guild Wars 2, on the other hand, I think that its endgame is immensely rewarding. All of the grinds that it has do respect your time pretty well, in my opinion, because they're very fun, they're very engaging, but the rewards at the end of those grinds are awesome. The Sky Scale is a great example of this. You can typically spend between 2 and 3 weeks, although if you know life, you could probably do this in 2 or 3 days. It's one of the best mounts in the game, and once you have it, it's a really cool feeling. You have this brand new mount that other people don't have. You can fly when everybody else is ground bound, and that's a cool thing. And then there's the legendary weapons system in Guild Wars 2, where you essentially take months and months to gather up crafting materials and then eventually build your legendary weapon. And people that have legendary weapons equipped in Guild Wars 2, it's awesome. It is so cool to see, and it's one of those things where when you see one of those people standing in the town square or playing next to you in World versus World, you know that person really took the time to make that end game experience theirs. Now, it is worth mentioning to Guild Wars 2 that this is again a horizontal game at end game. They want you to be able to play the game how you want to play it, so you don't necessarily have to do the raiding grind, or you don't necessarily have to do the legendary weapon grind. You can just basically do whatever you want. It's open-ended. I personally love this, but it is something that if you hate that, if you need that structure of a vertical game, LOTRO is going to be your pick. However, for me, if I have to answer these two questions simultaneously, does it respect your time and does it reward you well? I think that Guild Wars 2 takes the cake, but again, only by slightly. I would give this point to Guild Wars 2. And then lastly comes monetization, one of my favorite topics. And both of these games are actually really awesome in their monetization systems. Now, Lord of the Rings Online does have a subscription fee. You can use the subscription fee to make the game a lot more playable and easy to run with. You get basically all of the expansions up to the most recent one, which is great. And I think that the subscription fee is highly worth it in Lord of the Rings Online. There are also ways to pay for things like extra bag slots, extra bank slots in Lord of the Rings Online, just like there are in Guild Wars 2. But I think the big difference that exists between these two games, Lord of the Rings Online is arguably also pay to win because you could buy the traceries that we talked about earlier in the cash shop. However, I don't really know anybody that does that. It seems like it would miss the point of kind of that fulfilling grind that Lord of the Rings Online has. And of course, you can also buy cool cosmetics, cool mounts in the Lord of the Rings Online cash shop as well. However, the biggest difference between these two games would be its sub-fee policy, because Guild Wars 2, while it has the mount skins, while it has the outfits, while it has a lot of the account upgrades that you can get, it will never, ever have a sub fee. Every expansion comes with a box price that you can buy in-game or out of game, but it will never have a sub fee. And the cool thing about this is there is no FOMO for not playing Guild Wars 2. You don't really have a fear of missing out with this game, which I think is really cool when it comes to monetization on a personal level. I personally really like that, and although Lord of the Rings Online has done a great job with its monetization, especially recently since the 15th anniversary, they've pulled back a lot of the things that kept people out of it. This is a lot like the world building category, where it's kind of hard for almost any game to compete with Guild Wars 2. So I have to give this one to Guild Wars 2 because it has no sub fee. But again, Lord of the Rings Online's really is not egregious. Their monetization system, in my opinion, is very, very fair, but I gotta give the point to Guild Wars 2. All right, so that was our first episode of MMO Fight. I guess for me, Guild Wars 2 by points would be the winner, but again, all of these categories aside from PvP are just so gosh darn close. I could see it going either way. Probably as soon as I hit the stop recording button, I'm probably gonna change my mind, but I'd love to hear what you think in the comments down below. Which game wins for you? I think this is a really fun personal experiment for you to do while we watch the videos along. So let me know, does LOTRO win for you? Does Guild Wars 2 win for you? And in what categories did you differ from me? And let me know why in the comments down below. Friends, as always, if you liked this video, please like it. If you loved it, please hit the subscribe button. If you do me a favor, this is my first one of this series, so if you have any suggestions or things that you think I could do better, let me know in the comments down below. But friends, as always, before I go, the last two things that I say at the end of all of my videos are the most important thing that I could say in any video ever, and it's this. It's that you're more loved than you know, and you are so much more valuable than you realize. I hope you have an incredible day, and I will see you in the